On May 30, 1926, George Jorgensen Sr. and Florence Jorgensen welcomed their son, George William Jorgensen, into the world. Danish Americans who had married only 4 years earlier, they would christen George Jr. in the Danish Lutheran Church a few weeks later. George Jr. grew up in New York City and graduated from Christopher Columbus High School in the Bronx. He was considered rather slight and frail and interpersonally shy. George Jr. avoided rough-and-tumble play, sports, and other stereotypically male interests. He would go on to study photography at Mohawk College in Utica and did a brief stint in the military. He later received training at a medical and dental assistance school in Manhattan. Growing up in New York, George Jr. often felt that he had some kind of sexual and emotional disorder. In search of answers, he would investigate possible explanations by scouring books and articles at the New York Academy of Medicine library. His fear was he was homosexual. After all, he was sexually attracted to men. However, that did not appear to explain everything. George Jr. eventually experimented with the female hormone estradiol, and he learned during this time about a possible intervention taking place in Sweden that extended his experiments into a more meaningful and satisfying resolution. He went overseas and eventually found Dr. Christian Hamburger, an endocrinologist who was willing to provide him with hormonal replacement therapy. George Jr. would later have his testicles and penis removed. He also had vaginal plastic surgery. In 1952, George Jr. changed his name to Christine Jorgensen out of respect for Dr. Christian Hamburger. We are talking about the 1950s. This course of events would make headlines. Indeed, the New York Daily News banner headline read in all capital letters, "Ex-GI becomes blonde beauty. Operations transform Bronx youth." Although Christine was not the first person to undergo sex reassignment surgery, she noted in her autobiography that she was the most well-known at that time. Gender identity concerns were not that well understood in the 1950s. Frankly, they are not that well understood today. There are many questions left unanswered about what causes a person to have the psychological experience of being born in the wrong body. Controversies also exist in the area of treatment or care. How should parents respond when a child displays behaviors more characteristic of the opposite sex? Should cross-gender identification be redirected toward identification with one's birth sex? Should cross-gender identification be encouraged for a child who is already gender dysphoric? Should puberty be delayed to provide time for that kind of decision-making? Or what options exist for teens and adults? Should they be encouraged to enter into therapy to resolve the conflict through psychological intervention? Is cross-gender identification to be avoided, or should it be facilitated? When people have tried different interventions, what has been helpful? What are the reasons people pursue hormonal treatment and sex reassignment surgery? How often are these procedures helpful to people? What are the long-term effects of these kinds of interventions? These are remarkable, complicated questions that deserve our attention. We are no longer answering these questions in a cultural context of the 1950s. One difference we can all acknowledge is that our culture has shifted toward more supportive and varied sexual and gender identity labels and communities that are very accessible to people and their families. There have certainly been increased attempts to understand and respond to this often bewildering experience. The changing culture can be seen in both professional and popular treatment of the phenomenon. In the professional literature, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, DSM-5, reflected a shift away from gender identity disorder toward the use of the phrase gender dysphoria to reduce stigma. Actually, several steps in the new nomenclature were intended to reduce stigma. The first is the shift from an emphasis on identity as the disorder to the emphasis on the dysphoria or distress associated with the gender incongruence, for many people who report it. The other was the wording to allow for someone to no longer meet criteria following a transition. Our culture has in some ways moved past